So another way that you mentioned was the 4 quadrants of innovation grid. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I know that I'm innovative because I can generate a ton of sticky notes. When you have brainstorming, I'm usually the one that can come up with the most sticky note ideas. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, it's not the number of sticky notes that yields the best business result. So I started watching what was happening with innovation. And to me, it's wonderful that business is interested in creativity and that we know for sure, all of us know, that doing things the old way is not enough. The problem is that innovation in a vacuum is really risky. And so I started observing and interviewing people about what they really do, which is 4 quadrants of innovation, which combined create the impact that we want to have, which is cha-ching. So the first quadrant is engage. And engage is an example of when people are brought into the equation. So they're either engaged in thinking about it or you're engaging with your customers. But engaging is the people part. The second is imagining, and that's that outside the box, white space thinking that we traditionally have equated with innovation. The third is figure out, logistics. It does no good to have an innovative idea about trains arriving on a Thursday if they have to be there on Tuesday. So the logistics doesn't get a sexy place in the world of innovation, but you can be very innovative and really win competitively by focusing on the figuring out aspect. And then the final is to do a deep dive. And data and analysis has reached a new level. You don't just look at your market based on demographics. We don't just look at numbers and truncate them if there's more than 8 of them anymore. We can look at big data. We can look at fuzzy data. We can guess. We can imagine and model in ways that we couldn't before. So that the combination of engaging, imagining, figuring out, and doing a deep dive is what I call the 4 quadrants of integrated innovation.
So can we talk about a couple of companies in each of those quadrants who do it well?
Well, let's think about engage first.
Okay.
First quadrant. There was a woman named Danae Ringelman who had an idea, a hunch years ago, that there was a better way to fund independent films than what was happening in the world, say 5 or 6 years ago. And she imagined, although there was no such thing as crowdsourcing at the time, that there would be a way for, instead of one deep pockets individual to fund a movie or one studio to fund a movie, that there were a lot of stories that were really worthwhile that might benefit from 1,000 people paying $10 instead of one person paying for the whole bill. And so she imagined that there was a new way to engage people, and she imagined that this social interaction, which became crowdsourcing, would be a way to actually fund independent movies, because she thought that it would be much more democratic for stories that were about people and citizen journalism to be made, funded by many people. And so that hunch turned into a company called Indiegogo, which is now one of the largest crowdsourced platforms in the world.
So let's talk about Imagine. Who's done that well?
I love this story because it was very humbling. When I talked to Perry Farrell, who was the frontman for Jane's Addiction, which was a rock group, still is a rock group, and asked him a very naive question. I said, which rock group did you model yourselves after to come up with the idea of Lollapalooza, which is a big music festival, kind of like Woodstock, only now it's a lot cooler, or Coachella. And Perry Farrell said to me, what are you talking about? I didn't model myself after a music group, because if I did, then I'd end up being U2. So I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I imagined that there could be an intersection between rock music and something that had the ability to get butts in seats. Lots of people tailgating, having a great time for multiple days. So I said, so was it Coachella? He said, well, Coachella didn't exist. He said, no, it was NASCAR. Because NASCAR had the ability to get butts in seats, to get large numbers of people to be really passionate fans, and to have a shared crowd experience. So he took Jane's Addiction, and he imagined that it could be as big and cool and passionate as NASCAR, and he created Lollapalooza.
So let's talk about figure it out. Who's done a good job figuring it out?
I love the story of the lunatic watch. And Scott Wilson was an inventor, is an inventor. He's invented a lot of devices and has done a lot of industrial design. And he had the idea that we have naked wrists. This is basically real estate we don't use anymore because our mobile phones are telling us what time it is these days. And he thought, shame on us for having naked wrists. This is real estate that could be put to good use. And so what he did is he took the Nano from Apple, and he thought that if it could be put on a band, that you could have a Nano watch, where of course it tells you the time, but also like the old Dick Tracy watch, it could do other things. It could have music and really have you entertained and connected with news. And so he took the idea of figuring out not just how to design it, but also how to fund it. And he funded it on Kickstarter and had $900,000 raised in 1 month so that he could avoid venture capital, fund his idea, and he figured out not just the logistics of how to get a Nano and a band to be something that people craved, but also how to develop a whole new funding platform opportunity so he could go to market with the funding of the people that were going to use the product. Really brilliant way to figure it out.
And what's really interesting about that, by using crowdsourcing, in effect, he not only funded the company, but it also told him proof of concept, because if he had that many people who were willing to invest in the company, certainly there were that many people who would buy the product.
Well, that's a great point, because it flips everything backwards, doesn't it? It flips it around where you don't have to bring it to market and then pray that somebody's going to buy it. It's the opposite. You have all these fans that are waiting for the product to come to market, and they've pre-funded it.
So let's talk about taking a deep dive. Who's done that really well?
Well, I think it's interesting because I said earlier that innovation can be very risky. You know, you don't want to go to market with something. I mean, you can try to have the new pet rock or the new trendy thing, but really innovation goes so far beyond the number of sticky notes. And so the ability to look at data, analyze it, and figure out if there is really a deep dive insight that you can identify that can predict that there could be a future market. And my favorite example is not a small startup like I've just described, but it's actually GE. And about 6 years ago or 7 years ago, Mark Vachon was asked to talk about, to weigh in on whether GE should embrace sustainability. It's pretty risky for a large company to do something that could be considered to be a fad. You don't want to bet billions of dollars on a fad. And so originally, what I think is interesting is that the analysis was pretty much on the fence. Not sure if it was something that had staying power. Not sure if their industrial clients were really going to go for what they thought was perhaps a minority of people that were really interested. It was still early in this sustainability game. And so what was interesting is by doing a deep dive of the data, doing some experiments early on, and getting to the point where they could operationalize it and scale it, they started realizing that there was a huge opportunity for them to not just embrace eco-imagination as a sort of brand or kind of flash in the pan, but to really invest in a very serious way. And what I love about the story is that after voting against it through the data analysis in the beginning, the data and the deep dive itself is what inspired Mark Vachon to really back it, and then he was made the head of the division.